Everyone, welcome. We are going to do a little short reading by Russell today, and I'm going to give you a little short recording for Russell before we go on to more extensive readings from Lao Tzu on Taoism. Okay? So I want you to think, when you read these readings, Russell and Lao Tzu, I want you to think about connections there might be between them. I'm not going to spell out any of those connections today, but I trust that you have the ability to wonder about those connections and sort of wander through some questions of your own to connect them. So I want you to connect them, but I'm going to focus here just on three main points from Russell about the value of philosophy. Okay? So we could sum up Russell's whole piece here by saying there is a value to philosophy that's asking big questions. The value of philosophy, the main value of philosophy, is asking big questions. Now we can sort of split that one main point up into three smaller points. His first sort of subsection of the value of philosophy is that the value of philosophy is not just in giving definite answers, but is in questioning and asking the questions. Okay? The second main part of his overall main point is that part of the value of philosophy is freedom from the narrow, the self-interested, and the personal. Philosophy can take you to a place bigger than yourself. Okay? So again, the first one would be questions are actually valuable, not only answers. The second point would be that something bigger than yourself is valuable, not just the personal. Now, the third aspect of this is that Russell says there's a value in philosophy because it takes nothing for granted. So that means that whatever the prejudice or bias of your own time and place are, since philosophy doesn't take those ideas for granted, it can challenge and escape the prejudice and bias of the time and place that you live in. Okay? So those are the three main faces or aspects to the value of philosophy. Okay. So Russell really wants to emphasize that just asking questions, even if you don't get definite answers out of them, can be valuable. Answers are valuable too, but he says other domains can give us definite answers. Engineering, medicine, definite answers. And he says, but philosophy still does something valuable in answering questions, because he says philosophy helps us, quote, consider the question. It makes us aware of these questions' importance, and it keeps alive that speculative interest which is apt to be killed if we confine ourselves to definitely ascertainable knowledge. So you remember he says, he talks about these big questions that philosophy can ask. He says, is there any meaning to the universe, or is it just atoms crashing around? Is consciousness or truth a permanent part of the universe? Like, is it woven into the fabric of the world itself, or is it just something that sort of happens echoing around our head? Are good and evil importance to you and I, or are they somehow part of a bigger plan? Big questions like that are ones that philosophy can ask, and even though you won't get a 2 + 2 = 4 answer at the end of the day, it's important that you consider those kinds of questions. Okay. Second main point, the value of philosophy is the freedom from the narrow and the personal. Okay. You know how in your life there's all these things that concern you personally directly that cause you all this grief, right? And all this stress. A simple example would be, you ever get that text reply that's just the letter K, right? You never know whether the person's saying okay and affirming and agreeing with everything you just said, or if they're saying it in a short, angry, curt way. And then, you sweat, what did I do wrong? And you think, should I send another text? No, Okay, that's the personal. When you have a personal desire, you can get so caught up in it. That one letter, K, this small little one letter, can ruin your night, make you lose sleep. But philosophy asks these big ideas. It asks about things that don't concern you personally. right? So think of philosophy as occasionally taking a hike. When you're out there hiking up the mountain, you're not thinking about bills back home. You're not thinking about text messages that you can't decipher. In fact, you may not even get text messages out here on top of the mountain, right? Okay, philosophy isn't saying always live on the mountaintop, ignore all personal desires. What he's saying, though, is that a lot of personal desires come with grief and stress, and since philosophy considers the bigger than selfish, the things that are other than just your own personal desires, it gives you time and peace and freedom away from those things on occasion. So take advantage of that. Use it as a sort of relaxing break away from the stress of those things which you're concerned about. Okay? He also says that you can actually, ironically, get more knowledge this way, because he says knowledge is always the union of the subject, the person who's thinking, and the object, the thing they're thinking about. But if you want to know something, if you're so concerned with your own personal, small part of the world, you will actually put yourself up like a barrier or wall between you and the thing you want to know. Think about it this way. If you're trying to understand someone else and all you're thinking about is how you feel about what they said, what you want out of them, you're going to miss a lot of the stuff about them that they're trying to send to you. So if you put yourself as the subject or the knowing person first, you'll end up blocking some of the outside world, other people, things you want to know. So you have to let go of yourself a little bit if you want to know or come closer to other people and other objects, or objects in the world. Final point is this. The final sense of value of philosophy is this. Philosophy is a question, whereas everyone else wants answers. Philosophy is wondering about things that seem obvious to other people. Well, when you're born into a specific time and place, there's all sorts of ideas which seem obvious, which everyone agrees upon, right? Some of those are bad ideas. They're prejudice and bias, and they're assumptions that turn out not to be true. So by definition, if a prejudice or bias is something that everyone in a certain time and place believes is obvious but is not, and maybe false or harmful, since philosophy is exactly questioning everything that seems obvious, you will best be able to escape prejudice and bias of your time and place by doing philosophy which questions every assumption and prejudice and bias. Okay? So, just an example I like to give, it's not uncommon for French people to wear berets because they grew up in France. It's not uncommon for Scottish men to wear kilts to formal events. Now, if you had grown up in Scotland and you're a guy, you'd be likely to wear a kilt, but not many Americans do it. If you were a woman or man who grew up in Paris, you'd be likely to wear a beret, but not many Americans do it. So there's all these things, some much stranger and some harmful, unlike kilts and berets, that are built into us whether we know it or not, just from living locally where we live and in the time we live. And some of those ideas are very bad, like when most everyone in America thought slavery was totally legitimate, totally fine. It's exactly those who take up uncommon ideas, and exactly those who question everything, who are the first to recognize, wait, this idea which everyone else takes to be obviously true is actually a prejudice or a bias. Okay? So, a little spin on this that I'll add, the final point, is that if you want, if you look at history, those who innovated, people like Martin Luther King, those who spotted the problems of their society and innovated and came up with new things, weren't usually trained in some narrow specialty. They weren't trained just to be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer. Okay? They always studied the big ideas and the big books of philosophy. So if you want to innovate as a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, you already know this, right? You're going to have to learn to think outside the box if you want to innovate. But philosophy can teach you how to think outside the box better than anything else, and it can teach you to sort of live outside the box. You know what I mean? So if you want to innovate within your narrow specialty, if you want to innovate within America and not just repeat what every other American says, you need to learn to think and live outside the box. And philosophy is by definition stepping outside of the box. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about Russell. I know it's very brief, so if you have any questions, just shoot me an email, okay? All right, thank you, everyone.